Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I was hired on the dark web to transport cargo for the government. The cargo is alive and it's not from Earth. Let me start by saying I'm not the type of person who usually messes around with the deep web. Sure, I've browsed out of curiosity, but nothing serious. I was a bored college dropout with a crappy job, spending most of my nights scrolling Reddit, watching YouTube, and trying to figure out where my life went off the rails. You know, the usual quarter-life crisis type of stuff. That was until I stumbled into something I probably shouldn't have. It started like this. One night, I was hanging out in one of those weird subreddit threads about strange job offers on the dark web. You've probably seen them, the ones that are like, I was hired to stay in a haunted house for a week, or I found a mysterious USB in a used laptop. Most of them are nonsense, obviously, but people like me, bored, aimless, looking for something interesting, we eat that stuff up. While scrolling through the comments, someone mentioned that there was a hidden page you could access from a specific link on the deep web where people post actual job offers. Weird, sketchy jobs that pay you under the table and require complete secrecy. Now, most people would probably scroll right past that, but I was curious and, to be honest, a little desperate. My rent was overdue, and I was working a dead-end job at a gas station that barely paid enough to cover groceries. The idea of making a quick buck by doing something sketchy had crossed my mind before, so I figured, why not just look? I wasn't planning on actually doing anything, so I did what I probably shouldn't have. I downloaded Tor, went through all the hoops to stay anonymous, and started exploring. After a few hours of navigating the underbelly of the web, I found it. A forum called Black Box Deliveries. The description was simple. Discreet transport jobs for high-paying clients. No questions asked. Red flag, right? Yeah, I know. But like I said, desperation can make you do dumb things. I clicked through, expecting the usual sketchy nonsense. Instead, what I found was an anonymous post offering a transport job that paid $10,000 in cash. The instructions were super vague, which honestly should have been my second red flag. All it said was that I had to pick up a package from a location a few hours from my town, keep it in my possession for exactly 24 hours, and then deliver it to another location. No details on what I'd be transporting, how big it was, or even what the final destination was, just that I'd get more info after accepting the job. Here's where I should have walked away. I know that now. But back then, my brain was too focused on the idea of $10,000 in cash. That kind of money was life-changing for someone like me. All I could think about was how fast it would get me out of my miserable situation. So, I did what no sane person would do. I responded to the job post with the burner email I'd created and said I was in. About an hour later, I got a reply. It was short, direct, and it freaked me out immediately. Congratulations. Your application has been accepted. You will receive instructions soon. Do not share this job with anyone. Failure to comply will result in serious consequences. We'll be in touch. For the next couple of days, I was on edge, constantly checking my email for more details. Part of me hoped it was some kind of prank or that they'd just forget about me altogether. But then, just as I was starting to put the whole thing out of my mind, another email came through. This one had more information. Your pickup location is an old storage facility off Highway 9. Be there at 1 a.m. sharp. The storage unit number is 311. The access code will be provided upon arrival. Do not, under any circumstances, open the cargo. Handle it with care. You will be paid upon completion of the job. Something about the phrasing got under my skin. Do not, under any circumstances, open the cargo. I read it over and over, wondering what kind of thing needed to be transported in such secrecy. I knew deep down that this was going to be sketchy as hell, but 10 grand. Man, I wasn't thinking clearly. Fast forward to the night of the pickup. I left my apartment around midnight, the sky pitch black, with only the occasional flicker of streetlights lighting up the otherwise empty road. My anxiety was through the roof, but I kept telling myself it was going to be fine. People do weirder stuff for money all the time, right? The storage facility was exactly what you'd imagine. Old, run down, the kind of place that gave you the creeps just driving past it. There wasn't a single car or person in sight. The whole area was dead silent, except for the occasional rustle of wind against the metal walls of the units. I parked my car in front of Unit 311, my heart racing. There were no lights, except the ones from my headlights. I sat there for a minute, staring at the unit, half expecting something to jump out from the shadows. But nothing happened. After a few minutes of psyching myself up, I got out of the car and approached the unit. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone to check the email. Sure enough, there was a new message. Access code 5491. I punched it into the keypad and the door slid open with a metallic groan. The smell that hit me was strange. It wasn't bad, exactly. Just off, like metal, rust, and something faintly organic. And there it was. In the middle of the empty storage unit sat a large black crate, about 6 feet long and 3 feet high. It had no labels, no markings, just a solid black box with heavy locks on the side. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, my mind racing with all kinds of questions. But then I remembered the instructions. Do not, under any circumstances, open the cargo. I took a deep breath, grabbed the dolly they'd left for me, and loaded the crate into the back of my car. It was heavier than I expected, but nothing I couldn't handle. The whole time, I kept glancing at the box, half expecting it to move. But it didn't. I strapped it down, got back in the car, and took off down the highway. That's when things started to get weird. The first 20 minutes of the drive were uneventful, almost too uneventful. I was tense, constantly glancing in the rearview mirror at the crate strapped in the back. I kept telling myself that I was just being paranoid, that nothing weird was going to happen, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the car. The thing about fear is, once it sets in, every little noise becomes something bigger in your head. The creaks of my car suspension, the hum of the road beneath the tires, even the wind rattling against the windows, it all felt wrong. I turned up the radio, hoping some background noise would calm me down, but even that didn't help. Every song seemed off, like it was playing at the wrong speed or slightly out of tune. I couldn't shake the sense that something was about to happen, something I wasn't prepared for. Then, about 30 minutes into the drive, it did. I was heading down a stretch of road with no streetlights, just the glow of my headlights carving through the darkness. Out of nowhere, the crate shifted in the back seat. Not a lot, just a slight movement, like something had bumped against the inside of it. I glanced back, my pulse spiking, trying to convince myself it was just the road making it wobble. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I tried to focus on driving, keeping my eyes straight ahead, but that feeling was gnawing at me. Something inside that crate wasn't inanimate. It wasn't just some cargo. It was alive. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white, forcing myself to keep going. The instructions were clear. No matter what, I wasn't supposed to open it. But that's easier said than done when you start hearing noises coming from the back seat. At first, it was faint, like a soft scratching sound. It almost blended into the road noise, so I told myself it was just my imagination. Then the scratching got louder. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. The crate was still strapped down, but the locks on it were trembling, like whatever was inside was trying to get out. My stomach dropped. The car felt too small, too cramped with that thing in the back. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to pull over, to get out and run. But where was I going to go? I was in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but trees and empty fields on either side of me, and I still had hours to go before the drop-off. I tried to calm myself down, repeating the same thing in my head, over and over. Just follow the instructions. You're going to be fine. It's just a job, nothing more. But that scratching, that wasn't my imagination. It was real, and it was getting louder, more frantic. Then came the knocking. I nearly slammed on the brakes when I heard it, an unmistakable rhythmic thud coming from inside the crate. Something was definitely alive in there, and it was pissed. It knocked again, harder this time, and I could swear I heard a low growl, muffled by the thick walls of the box. I broke out in a cold sweat. My heart was racing, and my hands were shaking so bad that I had to grip the wheel tighter just to keep control. This wasn't normal. Whatever was in there, it wasn't anything I'd ever heard of. No animal made sounds like that. I started debating with myself. What if I just stopped for a minute, took a quick peek, just to see what I was dealing with? Maybe if I knew what it was, I'd feel less freaked out. But then I remembered the warning. Do not, under any circumstances, open the cargo. That phrase kept running through my mind like a mantra. If I opened that box, I had a feeling something bad would happen, something I couldn't take back. But what if it opened itself? That thought terrified me more than anything. What if whatever was inside was strong enough to break out? I tried to push the idea out of my head, but it wouldn't go away. I kept imagining the locks breaking, the lid flying off, and someone crawling out of that crate. I slammed on the brakes. My car skidded to a stop on the empty highway, the sudden silence pressing down on me like a weight. I threw the car in park and just sat there, staring at the rearview mirror, my breath coming in shaky gasps. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The crate was still. Then, a loud bang. This time, a single powerful thud shook the entire car. The crate jolted forward, nearly breaking the straps holding it down. Whatever was inside wasn't just scratching anymore. It was trying to break out. I turned around, heart pounding, and for the first time, I noticed something I hadn't before. In the dim glow of the car's interior lights, I could see that the metal of the crate wasn't solid. It was dented, like something had been pushing against it from the inside. That's when I knew I couldn't just keep driving like nothing was happening. Something was horribly wrong with this cargo. I grabbed my phone, opened the email from the anonymous sender, and reread the instructions, hoping I'd missed something, some detail that would explain what I was dealing with. But there was nothing. No hint of what was inside. Just the same cryptic message. Do not, under any circumstances, open the cargo. Another bang. This time, I saw the locks on the crate visibly shift, as though they were about to snap open. I panicked. My brain was screaming at me to run, to leave the car, and never look back. But I couldn't. $10,000. My life depended on that money. I couldn't just walk away, but I also couldn't let whatever was in that crate escape. In the heat of the moment, I did the only thing I could think of. I texted the anonymous contact who'd given me the job. I didn't care if I was breaking protocol. I needed answers. Something's wrong. It's trying to get out. What's inside the crate? I texted, my hands trembling. For what felt like an eternity, there was no response. Just me, sitting in the dark, alone on that empty highway, with the crate rocking violently behind me. Then my phone buzzed. One new message. All you need to know is it isn't from here. Do not stop. Deliver it, or you won't make it through the night. I stared at the screen, the words not making any sense at first. It isn't from here. What the hell did that mean? It wasn't from where? Suddenly, another thought crept into my mind, one I'd been desperately avoiding. What if this wasn't some shady delivery for the government? What if the government didn't know about it at all? What if this was something much, much worse? I took a deep breath and glanced back at the crate. The locks were still shaking, but they hadn't broken yet. I realized I didn't have a choice anymore. I shifted the car back into drive, my pulse pounding in my ears, and I sped off into the night, praying I'd survive long enough to finish the job. I drove faster than I ever had before, gripping the wheel with sweaty palms, trying to keep my focus on the road. My mind was racing with too many thoughts, all of them terrible. What did they mean by "it isn't from here"? Was I transporting something alien? I mean, it sounded insane, but at this point, nothing made sense anymore. The crate hadn't moved again for a few minutes, but that didn't make me feel any better. In fact, the silence made everything worse. I was waiting for it to happen. The next bang, the next sign that whatever was in that crate wasn't going to stay put for much longer. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it break open any second. But nothing happened. Just that eerie quiet. And then, like something out of a bad horror movie, my GPS suddenly went dead. 1 minute, it was guiding me to the drop-off location, and the next, the screen froze, and the route vanished. The little icon of my car sat there, unmoving, stuck in the middle of the empty road. I tried restarting the app, but nothing worked. No signal, no map, just a dark stretch of road with no end in sight. Panic started creeping in again. I didn't know where I was or how much farther I had to go. For a moment, I thought about turning back, just leaving the crate and pretending I'd never taken the job. But I couldn't shake that last text. Deliver it, or you won't make it through the night. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 2:30 a.m. There was still a long stretch of night ahead of me, and if I didn't figure out where I was going, I had a feeling that time would run out in a way I didn't want to think about. The road started to narrow, and before I knew it, I was surrounded by thick trees on both sides, the kind of woods that seemed to press in on you, making the road feel claustrophobic. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, the trees swallowing the light like a black hole. I felt more trapped than ever. I tried to shake off the unease, but then something caught my eye. Up ahead, just on the edge of the tree line, I saw a flash of movement. At first, I thought it was a deer, or maybe a stray animal, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't an animal at all. It was a person. They were standing just beyond the reach of my headlights, right at the edge of the woods. Their figure was barely visible, but I could tell they were watching me. Something about the way they stood there, completely still, sent chills down my spine. I slowed the car down, my heart pounding. What the hell were they doing out here in the middle of nowhere at this time of night? I squinted, trying to get a better look, but their face was shadowed, hidden by the trees. I couldn't make out any details, just the faint outline of someone staring directly at my car. That's when I noticed something else. There wasn't just one figure. There were three. 3 people, standing in a line, all perfectly still, watching me from the side of the road. I slammed on the gas. Whatever this was, I wanted no part of it. As I sped past, I stole one last glance in the rearview mirror, and for a second, I could have sworn they were walking toward the car. But that couldn't be right. They hadn't moved, had they? The road twisted ahead, curving deeper into the woods, and I lost sight of them. My hands were shaking again, and I was trying to control my breathing. I kept telling myself it was just a coincidence, just some people out late at night. But that didn't explain why they were standing in the middle of nowhere, or why they hadn't reacted to my car at all. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I saw something else that made my blood run cold. The crate shifted again, but this time it wasn't just a single bump or knock. The whole thing rattled violently, like something was fighting to break free. I swerved, nearly driving off the road, trying to regain control as the crate banged against the back seat. The metal locks groaned under the pressure, and I could hear that awful scratching sound again. Louder this time, more desperate. I had no idea what was in that crate, but whatever it was angry. It wanted out, and I was terrified it was going to get its wish. I sped up, pushing the car as fast as I could, my mind racing. I had to deliver this thing and get out of here before something happened, before the locks broke, before the people from the woods caught up to me, before... I don't even know. That's when I saw it. Up ahead, through the trees, there was a dim light. Not like a street light or a house. It was something else. A flickering, almost unnatural glow. My heart leapt. Maybe it was a sign of civilization. Maybe I could stop, get my bearings, figure out what the hell was going on. As I got closer though, the light grew stranger. It wasn't coming from a building or a car. It was just floating there in the woods, off to the side of the road. A soft, pale glow, hanging in the air like a lantern with no visible source. Something deep inside me told me to keep driving. Whatever that light was, it wasn't normal. It wasn't right. But my curiosity got the better of me. I slowed down, trying to get a closer look, but as soon as I did, the crate shifted violently again. This time, one of the locks snapped. I slammed on the brakes. My entire body froze. The crate rattled one more time, and then silence. For a moment, I thought maybe it had stopped, that whatever was inside had given up. But that was wishful thinking, because in the next second, I heard a sound that nearly made me scream. It wasn't scratching anymore. It wasn't banging. It was a voice, a low, guttural whisper coming from inside the crate. I couldn't make out the words, but they weren't in any language I recognized. They were harsh, like a growl mixed with speech, and they were getting louder. I had to act fast. I yanked the car into gear and sped off, the crate still rattling in the back. The voice didn't stop. It just kept getting louder, more frantic, like it was trying to tell me something. I didn't care anymore. I just needed to get this thing to the drop-off point and get as far away from it as possible. Then my phone buzzed. Another text from the anonymous number. Do not stop again. Do not listen to it. Get to the location now. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I tossed it onto the passenger seat and floored the gas pedal, the car roaring down the road. I had no idea where the drop-off was anymore. My GPS was dead. The road was endless, and the woods around me felt like they were closing in. But I had to keep going, because one thing was clear. Whatever was in that crate wasn't just trying to escape. It was trying to communicate. The road ahead was endless, stretching into the darkness like some kind of nightmarish treadmill. No landmarks, no signs, just the narrow ribbon of asphalt with trees pressing in on both sides. My mind was spinning out of control. Like the longer I stayed on that road, the farther I was drifting from reality. The crate in the back wasn't quiet anymore. The whispering had gotten louder, more frantic, like it was building to something. It was no longer a low, growling mutter. It was clearer now, but still impossible to understand. The language didn't sound human. The words were sharp, guttural, filled with clicks and hisses that made my skin crawl. My knuckles were white as I gripped the wheel, every muscle in my body screaming to just pull over, stop, and figure out what the hell was going on. But I couldn't. The text was burned into my brain. Do not stop again. Do not listen to it. But how do you not listen when something is talking in the back seat? When it's no longer just trying to break out, but actively communicating, trying to get into your head. The lights in the car flickered. First the dashboard, then the headlights. Just a quick dimming, but enough to make my heart jump into my throat. I didn't know what was worse. The possibility of something wrong with the car, or the idea that it was the crate causing it. A crackling sound filled the air, like static. My radio had been off, but suddenly it blared to life, stuck between stations, spewing out garbled noises. At first, it was just a mess of white noise and broken signals, but then, over the static, I heard something. A voice, not from the crate, but through the radio. Turn. Around. The voice was barely there, like it was coming through layers of distortion. It wasn't like the whispering from the crate. This was different, distant, but unmistakable. I felt my stomach twist. My instinct screamed at me to do what it said, to turn the car around and leave whatever was in that crate behind. But where could I even go? I didn't know where I was anymore. And the second I stopped driving, I had no doubt that whatever was in the crate would break out. The voice from the radio crackled again, more insistent this time. Turn. Around. Before. It's too late. Too late for what? I didn't even know what I was dealing with yet, and every part of my brain was telling me to leave this job unfinished, take my chances in the woods, or, hell, just abandon the car and run. But the words of the last text played over and over in my head. If I didn't deliver the crate, I wouldn't make it through the night. That much was clear. I looked in the rearview mirror again, just in time to see something that made my heart nearly stop. The crate was moving, not just shifting slightly, not just rattling. It was pulsing. The black metal sides were swelling out, like something inside was breathing, pushing against the walls. The locks trembled, the lid lifting just slightly as the pressure from within built. The air in the car grew heavy, thick with a strange metallic smell that made my stomach churn. The whispering intensified. This time, it wasn't just a single voice. It was multiple, overlapping, like a chorus of the same alien language. all speaking in unison, each word making the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I slammed my foot on the gas, speeding down the road as fast as I could without losing control. The trees outside the window blurred, but all I could focus on was the crate in the back seat, the way it seemed to expand with every mile, its shape distorting as whatever was inside pushed harder, louder. Then the radio voice came again. This time it was clearer, more urgent. "You can't stop it. It's already out." I swallowed hard, panic tightening around my chest like a vice. Out? What the hell did that mean? The crate was still sealed, wasn't it? I hadn't heard the lock snap, but I was too afraid to check. Every instinct I had was telling me to keep driving, to not look back. But something was wrong. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, that growing sense that something else was in the car with me. Not just inside the crate, but out here in the cabin, watching me. I glanced into the rearview mirror again, and this time my blood turned to ice. There was a shadow, a figure sitting in the back seat, right next to the crate. I swerved, nearly losing control of the car, my breath catching in my throat. I turned around, expecting, praying, that my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the figure was gone. The back seat was empty, just the crate, still pulsing, still whispering that alien language, louder and louder. My heart was racing. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins, the weight of whatever this thing was bearing down on me. The figure, had it been real? Was something actually sitting next to the crate, or was it just my mind playing tricks on me? I didn't have time to process it. Up ahead, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The road ended. There was no warning, no signs, just a sheer cliff ahead. I hit the brakes hard, the car skidding to a stop, inches from the edge. My headlights illuminated a massive drop into nothingness. No way forward, no other road, just emptiness. I sat there, panting, heart pounding in my chest. I was stuck. There was no way forward, and I couldn't turn around, not with the crate doing whatever it was doing back there. The air in the car was suffocating, the metallic stench growing stronger. I glanced at the crate again, and this time, I knew something was horribly wrong. The locks were gone. The lid was slowly lifting, pushed open from the inside. I could hear the whispers growing louder, turning into something that sounded almost like chanting. I backed up in my seat, my eyes locked on the crate, my heart slamming against my ribs. Then the lid flew open, and the thing inside wasn't anything I'd ever seen. It was a shape, a mass of dark, shifting material that didn't belong in this world. It moved like liquid, but solid at the same time, tendrils of blackness unfurling, filling the back seat. The whispers became deafening, surrounding me, invading my mind. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. My entire body was frozen in place, staring at the thing that shouldn't exist, that couldn't exist. But it was here, and it was out of the crate. The car door beside me flew open as if forced by an invisible hand. A gust of freezing wind rushed in, and for the briefest moment, I thought about running, about diving out of the car and taking my chances in the woods. But I couldn't move. The shadowy tendrils snaked toward me, twisting and coiling like they were alive, like they were reaching for me. And as they got closer, the whispers inside my head shifted into words I could finally understand. "You are part of this now." I sat there paralyzed, watching the tendrils of blackness spill out of the crate. The cold wind that rushed through the open car door felt like it was sucking the air out of my lungs, freezing me in place. My mind was screaming at me to move, to do something, but my body wouldn't respond. The thing from the crate, it wasn't solid, but it wasn't smoke either. It twisted and writhed like something in constant flux, shifting from one form to another. Whatever it wasn't bound by the rules of our world. The whispers had turned into a low, droning hum, and even though I couldn't make out the exact words, the meaning was painfully clear. I had let it out. The black tendrils crept closer, slow and deliberate, like it knew I had nowhere to go. Each one seemed to pulse with a strange energy, almost like it was alive, but not in any way that made sense. The shadows wrapped themselves around the edges of the car, creeping across the floor and up the sides of the seats. The temperature inside the car dropped even lower, and I could see my breath, thick clouds of fog forming with every panicked exhale. Then, suddenly, the whispers stopped. The silence that followed was even worse, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, out of the quiet, a voice, clearer this time, as if the entity had finally figured out how to communicate with me. "You have seen too much." It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was in my head, as loud and as real as if someone was speaking right into my ear. The voice wasn't human. It was deeper, layered, almost like several voices speaking at once, but it was impossible to tell if it was male or female, or something else entirely. My body jolted back into action, adrenaline surging through me. I lunged for the door handle, but before I could even think about jumping out, the tendrils coiled around my wrist, freezing me in place. The touch wasn't painful, but it felt like every nerve in my body was on fire, like I was being drained, my strength, my will, everything being sucked out of me. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My throat tightened, the air around me too thick to breathe. The thing, whatever it was, wasn't just holding me. It was feeding on me, pulling me into it. I could feel it seeping into my skin, crawling into my mind, and for a brief second, I understood what the voice had meant. I wasn't just transporting the cargo. I was the cargo now. I pulled hard, trying to break free, but the harder I struggled, the more the tendrils wrapped around me. My vision blurred, the world around me darkening as the thing enveloped me, piece by piece. I could feel my thoughts slipping away, like it was absorbing everything that made me who I was. The memories of the job, the instructions, even my own name. It was all fading. And then, just when I thought I was going to disappear into that void, the car jerked violently to the side. The impact was sudden, like something huge had slammed into us. The tendrils loosened their grip just long enough for me to snap out of my trance. I gasped for air, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. My car was spinning, skidding off the road and into the trees. The headlights flickered, casting wild shadows as the car crashed through the underbrush, and then, mercifully, came to a stop. For a moment, everything was still. I blinked, trying to focus, my head pounding. The thing, whatever it was gone. At least, it wasn't in the back seat anymore. The crate was still there, its lid wide open, but the dark mass that had spilled out was nowhere to be seen. I pushed the door open, half falling out of the car, my legs shaky and numb from the cold. My body felt heavy, like something had been taken from me, leaving me weak and disoriented. I stumbled away from the car, my breath coming in ragged gasps, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That's when I saw them, the figures from before, the ones I'd seen standing on the side of the road. They were back, standing in a perfect line just beyond the trees, watching me. This time, I could see them more clearly. Their faces were shadowed, but their eyes were glowing. Pale, unnatural light, just like the strange glow I'd seen earlier in the woods. They weren't people. They couldn't be. They didn't move. They just watched, their glowing eyes fixed on me, like they were waiting for something. I turned back to the car, panic clawing at my chest. I had to get out of here. I didn't care about the job anymore, or the money, or any of it. I just needed to get away from whatever this was. But when I looked at the car, I froze. The thing that had been in the crate, it wasn't gone. It was behind me. I could feel it before I saw it, the air around me thickening again, that same dark energy pressing down on me. I turned, slowly, every instinct telling me not to, but I had to see. And there it was, looming in the darkness, its shape barely visible, like a shadow that didn't belong in this world. The tendrils were back, snaking toward me, slow and deliberate. But this time, they weren't just reaching for me. They were reaching for the figures in the woods too. That's when I realized what was happening. This thing, this creature, wasn't just trying to escape. It was trying to merge with everything around it, to consume it, absorb it. And I was next. My heart raced as I stumbled back, desperately trying to think of a way out. The figures in the woods still hadn't moved. They just stood there, their glowing eyes watching me like I was already part of the inevitable, like I was already claimed. But then, something strange happened. The thing stopped. The tendrils froze in place, just inches from me, quivering like they were caught in some invisible force. And for the briefest moment, I felt it hesitate, like it was struggling to maintain its form, to keep itself together. I didn't know what was happening, but I didn't wait to find out. I turned and ran, sprinting through the woods, branches tearing at my clothes, the cold night air burning my lungs. I didn't care where I was going. I just had to get away. Behind me, I heard the low hum of the thing grow louder, more frantic. The figures in the woods, whatever they were still watching, but they didn't follow. They just stood there, their eyes glowing, as if they were part of this thing, part of the nightmare. I didn't stop running until I reached the highway, my legs trembling, my body on the verge of collapse. I could still feel the cold grip of the tendrils on my skin, still hear the whispering in the back of my mind. But I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The thing was out, and it wasn't going back in the crate. I found a dark web chat room where people claim to have been abducted by aliens. Now, I'm starting to see them too. This all started because I got curious. Too curious, I guess. I'd always heard stories about the dark web, but I never really thought much of it. You know the usual stuff people say. It's dangerous. Don't go poking around there. That kind of warning. But I'm one of those people that hears don't do it, and just has to. I don't know why. I guess I just assumed nothing would actually happen to me. Boy, was I wrong. I wasn't some tech genius or anything, but I knew enough to get myself onto some sketchy corners of the internet. I didn't go there looking for anything illegal or super disturbing like you hear about on the news. Honestly, I was just bored. Reddit, YouTube, even Netflix weren't cutting it anymore. I wanted something new, something exciting, something weird. I wanted to see what all the fuss was about. So, one night, around 2 a.m., because isn't that when the worst ideas always seem like the best, I fired up my old laptop tossed on a VPN, and did a little digging. I found my way into some forums, mostly boring stuff. A lot of conspiracy theories, weird rantings, people selling stolen goods. But one link caught my eye. It was titled, Project Skywatchers, have you been taken? Join our chat room. I hesitated for a second. Taken? By who or what? It had to be some role-playing thing, right? I was intrigued, but also a little freaked out. Maybe it was a joke, maybe it wasn't. The thing is, you hear about alien abduction stuff on the surface web all the time. Reddit's full of UFO sightings, missing time stories, and people claiming to have been abducted by little gray men. I always thought that stuff was ridiculous. Like, entertaining, sure, but just stories people made up for attention. But the chat room? I don't know why I clicked it. I think I wanted to see if people were seriously pretending to have been abducted. I thought it would be funny. I wasn't laughing long. The chat room was simple, mostly black with white text. No usernames, just timestamps and messages flying by faster than I could keep up. The first thing I noticed was how serious the tone was. No memes, no jokes, nothing like I'd expected. The people here weren't just role-playing. They sounded like they really believed what they were saying. It happened again last night. The buzzing sound, the bright light. I blacked out. I saw them in my room. I tried to scream, but I couldn't move. They were just standing there. Has anyone else experienced time loss after seeing the black triangles? I sat there, staring at the screen, watching these people share their experiences like they were veterans of some war no one knew was happening. The more I read, the more uncomfortable I got. I told myself it was all fake, but something about the way these messages were written, it didn't feel like your typical online nonsense. These people seemed shaken, scared even. One message made me stop dead in my tracks. Once you start reading, they know. Be careful. Now, I don't consider myself superstitious, but you know that feeling when you read something that makes your stomach drop, like a pit forms in your gut, and you just know you've done something you shouldn't have. Yeah, that's what I felt. I tried to brush it off as just another user messing around. But then, in real time, someone responded to that message. It's too late. They'll come for you now. They always do. I leaned back from the screen, feeling a sudden chill. This was getting way too weird. Before I could close out of the chat, my screen flickered. For a second, I thought my laptop was just lagging, but then everything went black. No joke, my computer completely shut off. I tried to reboot it, but nothing happened. No lights, no sound, just dead. That had never happened before. I mean, sure, it was old, but I'd never had it just die on me like that. I stood up, rubbed my eyes, and tried not to freak out. Maybe it was just a coincidence, right? Computers glitch sometimes. That's all it was. But as I stood there, staring at my blank screen, something caught my eye. There, in the corner of my room, right next to the window, was a faint, glowing light. It wasn't bright, just a small pulse of white, barely noticeable if you weren't looking for it. But I was looking at it. And the weirdest part? It wasn't coming from inside my room. It was outside, like someone was shining a tiny flashlight right against the window. I didn't move for what felt like forever, just stood there, frozen, heart pounding, as the light kept pulsing. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to pull the curtains aside. Nothing. The light disappeared the second I touched the fabric. I told myself it was just headlights from a car outside, or maybe a reflection of something. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There hadn't been a sound outside. No cars, no wind, just silence. I sat back down at my desk, not really sure what to do next. I wanted to boot up my laptop again, but it was still dead. So, I did the only thing that made sense at the time. I grabbed my phone to check if anyone else had experienced something like this. Maybe the chat room had been playing some weird prank on me. But when I unlocked my phone, I noticed a new notification. No app logo, no sender, just a simple message that read, "We see you now." I stared at the message on my phone, my mind racing. It didn't make sense. How could I get a notification without a sender? Was my phone hacked? Or maybe it was some weird glitch. But as much as I tried to reason it away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to what had just happened on my laptop. "We see you now." I couldn't get those words out of my head. Was this some kind of sick joke? I wanted to believe it was, but the timing was too perfect. That light outside my window, my laptop dying, the message, it all lined up too well to be random. I didn't sleep that night. Every little sound, the creaking of the house settling, the distant hum of the fridge, the occasional car passing outside, made me jump. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see that light again, but nothing happened. Eventually, sometime around 5 a.m., I must have dozed off because I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was a text from my friend Alex. "Yo, you coming to the gym today?" I stared at the message for a second, my brain still foggy from barely any sleep. For a brief moment, I thought about telling him what had happened, but it sounded so insane in my head. "Oh, hey man, I was in a dark web chat room about alien abductions, and now I think I'm being watched. Yeah, no." That would go over well. I ended up replying with a simple, "Not today. Not feeling well." I had to figure this out on my own. Maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe it was all in my head, but I wasn't ready to just forget about it. So I spent the day trying to troubleshoot my laptop, but no luck. It was like it had been fried, completely dead. I wasn't tech savvy enough to know why, but something about the timing still felt off. There was no way that chat room had anything to do with it, right? I decided to do a little research on my phone. Carefully, this time. I didn't want to end up somewhere sketchy again. I started searching for anything I could find on Project Skywatchers or dark web chat rooms about alien abductions, but most of what came up were conspiracy theory forums or old YouTube videos claiming to expose the truth. Typical clickbait, nothing concrete. But then I found a thread on an old forum buried deep in a Google search. The title caught my eye. "Skywatchers, they're real, and they're watching." I clicked on it and began reading. The post was from some guy who claimed he'd been part of the Project Skywatchers chat room years ago, back when it was smaller and harder to find. According to him, the people in that chat weren't lying. They weren't role-playing. They were genuinely convinced that something was out there, something that watched, abducted, and experimented on people. He said that once you joined the chat and started reading, they would notice you. And once they noticed you, they didn't stop. The more I read, the worse it got. People in the thread talked about seeing strange lights outside their homes, hearing strange noises at night, and, in some cases, experiencing lost time, where they'd black out and wake up hours later with no memory of what happened. A few claimed they'd found small marks on their bodies, tiny incisions or bruises they couldn't explain. One guy mentioned waking up with dirt under his fingernails, like he'd been outside, even though he had no memory of leaving his bed. I was starting to freak myself out, so I closed the thread and tossed my phone aside. My heart was racing again, and I realized my palms were sweating. This was stupid. There was no way this was real. People were just making up stories. It was like those urban legends that spread on the internet. They weren't real, right? Right? I took a deep breath and went to get a glass of water. As I stood in the kitchen, I tried to calm myself down. Maybe I'd just gotten too caught up in all the alien abduction stuff. It was messing with my head. I needed to chill. But as I stood there, staring blankly at the faucet, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My phone, which I'd left on the counter, buzzed again. I hesitated, then slowly reached for it. My hands were shaking as I turned it over to see the screen. Another notification. No sender, no app, just a message. Look outside. My heart was in my throat. I didn't move. I didn't want to. Every instinct was screaming at me to not look, but at the same time, I couldn't just ignore it. What if someone really was outside? The thought chilled me to the bone, but I couldn't help myself. I walked slowly towards the window, the floorboards creaking under my feet. My breath felt tight in my chest as I reached the curtains. I stood there for a moment, hand hovering over the fabric. My pulse was so loud in my ears that I almost couldn't hear anything else. For a second, I thought about walking away, just ignoring it, pretending this wasn't happening, but I didn't. I pulled the curtain back in one swift motion. There was nothing there. No strange lights, no figures lurking in the shadows, just the quiet street outside, still and empty. I felt a rush of relief, like maybe this really was just a prank after all. But then, just as I was about to turn away, I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. A soft, deliberate knock at the window. I froze. The sound was so faint that I almost convinced myself I hadn't heard it. But then it came again, a little louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. I slowly leaned forward, my breath fogging up the glass as I pressed my face closer, trying to see what was making the noise. And then I saw it. A hand, small, pale, and disturbingly thin, pressing up against the glass from the other side. And that's when I realized something horrifying. There was no one standing on the other side of the window, just the hand, and it was reaching for me. I can't tell you how fast I backed away from that window. My legs felt like jelly, and I was shaking so bad that I almost tripped over my own feet. The thing is, it didn't even make sense. How could a hand be there without a body? Was it some kind of trick? An illusion? Whatever it was, I wasn't about to stick around and find out. I bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know where to go or what to do, so I just stood in the hallway, trying to calm myself down. My heart was racing so fast, I thought it might burst out of my chest. The house felt different, like there was something in it with me now. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and the silence. It was wrong. Too quiet, like the world outside had shut off, leaving me trapped in some sort of dead zone. I was trying to convince myself that I was imagining things, that none of this could actually be happening. But every time I replayed that image in my head, the hand, impossibly thin, pressed against the window, reaching, I felt like I was going to be sick. My phone buzzed again, making me jump so hard I almost dropped it. I didn't want to look, but I had to. This time, the message was different. It wasn't just some cryptic sentence. It was a picture. My thumb hovered over the notification for what felt like an eternity before I finally clicked it. The image opened and my stomach dropped. It was a photo of my house, taken from outside. I recognized the front door, the steps leading up to it, the light in the window, my window. I could even see my reflection faintly in the glass, just before I had pulled the curtain back. The photo had been taken just seconds before I looked outside. I was officially freaking out now. Someone had to be messing with me, right? Maybe a hacker or a stalker. But then my mind flashed back to the chat room. Once you start reading, they know. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, but deep down, I knew better. I felt like I was being watched, like something or someone was lurking just out of sight, waiting. My skin was crawling, and every time I looked toward a dark corner or a shadowed part of the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was hiding there, watching me. I needed to get out of the house, clear my head, do something other than stand there, paralyzed by fear. So, I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, trying not to think about the photo or the hand at the window. Maybe if I just got some fresh air, I could make sense of all this. The second I stepped outside, I knew something was wrong. The air felt too still, too cold. It wasn't even that late in the day, but it felt like night had fallen early. The streetlights hadn't come on yet, but the sky was dark, almost unnaturally dark. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me from across the street, but it was empty, dead quiet. I started walking, trying to shake the eerie feeling that was creeping up my spine. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, like I was dragging myself through molasses. My mind kept flashing back to that chat room, the stories of people who'd been taken, the way they talked about it, like it wasn't a physical abduction, but something else, something that crawled into your life, your mind, without you even noticing, until it was too late. The streets were empty, no cars, no people. It was as if the whole neighborhood had just disappeared, and I was the only one left. I kept checking my phone, half hoping I'd get another message so I could convince myself this was all some elaborate prank. But there was nothing, just that eerie silence. I didn't know where I was going. I was just walking, trying to escape whatever had wormed its way into my life. But the further I went, the worse I felt. The shadows around me seemed to grow, stretching out across the pavement like they were alive, twisting into strange, unfamiliar shapes. I swear I saw something move out of the corner of my eye, something fast, darting from one shadow to the next. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, my breath coming out in short, panicked gasps. I could feel something behind me, just out of sight. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't want to turn around, but I couldn't help myself. Slowly, I glanced over my shoulder. There, standing at the edge of the street, barely visible in the fading light, was a figure. Tall, thin, motionless. It wasn't a person, at least not like any person I'd ever seen. Its limbs were too long, its silhouette too sharp and angular, and its eyes were glowing faintly, like dim embers in the dark. I blinked, and it was gone. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. I kept telling myself I hadn't seen anything. It was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more I felt like something was closing in, like the air around me was getting tighter, pressing in on me from all sides. I turned and started walking faster, then jogging, then full-on sprinting. I didn't know where I was going anymore. I just needed to get away, to escape this feeling, this thing that was stalking me. I could feel it behind me, its presence growing stronger, like a weight pressing down on my chest. By the time I finally made it back to my house, I was out of breath, my legs shaking. I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it, double-checking it, and then locking it again for good measure. I pressed my back against the door, trying to catch my breath, my mind racing. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling, and opened my messages, dreading what I might find. But there was nothing. No new notifications, no photos, no cryptic messages, just silence. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to think that maybe it was over. Maybe whatever I'd seen, whatever had been following me, was just a figment of my imagination. But that relief didn't last long, because as I stood there, trying to calm down, I heard something from upstairs. A creak, then another. Footsteps, and they were coming closer. I stood there, frozen at the bottom of the stairs, straining to hear the sound again. My heart was pounding in my chest so hard, I thought it might explode. The footsteps, if that's even what they were, had stopped. But the silence that followed was worse. It was that heavy kind of silence, the kind that presses against your ears, amplifying every tiny noise in the house. I couldn't tell if it was my imagination or if someone or something was actually up there. I wanted to run, to get the hell out of there, but my feet wouldn't move. My brain was stuck in some kind of primal loop, screaming at me to do something, but all I could do was stand there, staring up into the darkness at the top of the stairs. Then, just as I was about to take a step back, I heard it again, creak. This time, it was louder, closer, like something was shifting its weight on the floorboards just above me. I forced myself to breathe, slowly, trying to steady my nerves. Maybe it was the house settling. Old places make weird noises all the time, right? Except, this wasn't an old house. It wasn't supposed to creak like that. And that noise wasn't random. It was deliberate, like someone was moving. I didn't want to look, but my eyes kept darting toward the top of the stairs, expecting to see something leaning over the banister, staring down at me. I kept picturing that hand from the window, pale and bony, reaching out of the darkness. And if there was a hand, then there had to be a body attached to it. A body that was up there now, waiting for me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. I almost didn't want to check it, but I couldn't help myself. My fingers fumbled as I pulled it out, the screen glowing bright in the dim hallway. A new message. This time, it wasn't a picture, it was a video, and it was only 3 seconds long. I hesitated before pressing play, my thumb hovering over the screen like it might explode the second I touched it. But my curiosity, my need to understand what was happening, got the better of me. The video started with a shaky shot of a room. My room, I realized. The camera was pointed at my bed. I could see my blankets, my pillows, even the half-empty water bottle on the nightstand. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold, because the bed wasn't empty. There was someone lying in it. Mr. I was staring at myself, sound asleep, completely unaware that someone or something had been standing there, filming me. The camera zoomed in slowly, focusing on my face, on my closed eyes, and then, just before the video cut out, there was movement in the corner of the frame, something pale and thin, just out of focus, creeping toward the bed. The video ended. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the phone. I stood there, trying to process what I'd just seen. That video, Someone had been in my room watching me while I slept. I'd been completely unaware, vulnerable. I suddenly felt exposed, like the walls of my house weren't enough to protect me anymore. It wasn't just the idea of someone being in my room. It was the fact that they'd left no trace, no sign that they'd ever been there. I hadn't woken up. I hadn't even stirred. They could have done anything, and I wouldn't have known. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. Call the cops? What would I even tell them? That I got a creepy video on my phone from some unknown number? They'd laugh me off. Or worse, think I was losing it. That's when I heard it again. Creak. Another footstep. This time it was followed by a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. It was closer now, just at the top of the stairs. My whole body tensed, and I finally forced myself to move. Slowly, quietly, I backed away from the stairs, keeping my eyes locked on the dark hallway above. I didn't know what was up there, but I wasn't going to wait around to find out. My hand brushed against the front door, and for a second, I considered bolting, just getting the hell out of the house and running until my legs gave out. But I couldn't. I didn't know why, but I felt trapped, like leaving wouldn't solve anything. Whatever was happening, it wasn't going to stop just because I ran. I had to know. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, an old wooden bat I'd bought years ago for some softball league I never ended up joining, and took a deep breath. Slowly, I started up the stairs, my heart pounding louder with every step. The wooden bat felt useless in my hands, more like a comfort object than a weapon. If something was up there, if something was waiting for me, I didn't think a bat would do much. As I reached the top, I paused, straining my ears for any sound. The hallway stretched out in front of me, dark and still. My room was at the end of it, the door half open, just like I'd left it. I inched forward, gripping the bat tighter, my knuckles white from the pressure. The floor creaked under my feet, but nothing moved. No sound came from the other rooms, just that thick, oppressive silence, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I reached my bedroom door and slowly pushed it open, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The door creaked on its hinges, revealing my room just as I'd left it, at least at first glance. The bed was neatly made, the window closed, the same half-empty water bottle on the nightstand. Everything was exactly how it had been before I left earlier, but something felt wrong. The air was thick, heavy, like the room was holding a breath that didn't belong to it. And then I saw it, the one thing that wasn't right. My closet door. It was slightly open, just a crack, like someone had closed it in a hurry, but didn't push it all the way. I never left it like that. Ever. I swallowed hard, gripping the bat tighter. The video flashed through my mind. Me, asleep in that very bed, with something in the room. Had it come from the closet? Was it still there? My legs felt weak, but I couldn't leave without checking. I stepped toward the closet, each step slower than the last. The distance between me and that door felt like a mile. My breathing was shallow, my palms sweaty, the bat slipping in my grip. I tried to stay quiet, but the floor creaked under my weight, betraying me with every step. I stopped in front of the closet, staring at that sliver of darkness beyond the door, trying to see if something, anything, was moving inside. I leaned in slowly, barely breathing, and placed my hand on the door handle. I waited. Nothing. My heart pounded in my ears as I yanked the door open in one swift motion, swinging the bat up, ready to defend myself. but there was nothing inside. No strange figures, no shadows, just my clothes, hanging limply on their hangers, swaying slightly from the motion of the door. I let out a shaky breath, half relieved, half confused. My knees buckled a little, and I lowered the bat, letting it rest against the floor. I was just about to turn around when I saw it, something small and out of place, almost hidden beneath the hanging clothes. A piece of paper. It was folded neatly, resting on the floor of my closet, like someone had placed it there on purpose. My throat tightened as I reached down and picked it up, my hands trembling. The paper was cold, like it had been sitting in the dark for a long time, waiting for me to find it. I unfolded it slowly, my breath catching in my throat as I read the single line scrawled across the page. "We are closer than you think." Before I could even process the message, I heard a noise from behind me, a faint, rustling sound, like fabric brushing against skin. I turned around slowly, my heart in my throat, and my eyes fell on the bed. There, half hidden in the shadows, was a figure. No, not a figure, a face. It was pale, impossibly pale, with large dark eyes that seemed too big for its head. Its skin was stretched tight, over sharp, angular bones, and its mouth was just a thin, lipless line, as if it hadn't been designed to speak, and it was watching me. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. It wasn't human. I knew that instantly. It couldn't be. Its limbs were too long, its eyes too dark, too hollow, but it was there, in my room, sitting on my bed, watching me with those empty eyes. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even breathe. Then, without a sound, it stood up, its movements slow and deliberate. It didn't lunge at me or make any threatening gestures. It just stood there, towering over me, its head tilting slightly, as if it were curious about me. And then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, barely a sound at all, it spoke. "We see you now." I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and bolted down the hallway, slamming the door behind me, my legs carrying me faster than I thought possible. I didn't stop until I was out of the house, standing on the street, gasping for air. I didn't care where I was going. I just had to get away. But as I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, watching me. No matter how far I went, no matter how fast I ran, I knew it wasn't over, because they had seen me now, and they weren't going to stop, not until they had me. I didn't stop running until I was halfway across town. The cold air stung my lungs. My legs felt like they were going to give out, and my vision blurred from panic. But I couldn't stop. I didn't even know where I was going. All I knew was I needed to be away from that thing, from my house, from whatever had just crawled into my life from the dark corners of the web. Eventually, I found myself outside a 24-hour diner. The neon lights buzzed faintly, and the place looked deserted, save for a couple of cars parked outside. I stumbled in, breathing hard, collapsing into a booth near the back. The waitress, a tired-looking woman with deep bags under her eyes, barely glanced at me before shuffling over with a menu. I waved it away. "Just water, please," I managed to choke out. She nodded, not asking any questions, which was a small mercy. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. Hell, maybe I had. As I sat there, my back pressed against the cold vinyl of the booth, I tried to make sense of everything. Was it real? Was my mind playing tricks on me? Maybe I was losing it. Lack of sleep. Too much time spent down the internet's weirdest rabbit holes. It all could have been a nightmare. brought on by stress, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. My phone was still in my hand, and I realized I'd been gripping it so tightly, my knuckles were white. Slowly, I unlocked it, almost too afraid to look, but the screen was blank. No messages, no new notifications, nothing. I checked the gallery for the video from earlier, the one of me sleeping, but it was gone. There was no sign of it, no trace, as if it had never existed. My stomach turned. My phone had been wiped. Or maybe I wasn't supposed to see that video in the first place. I sat there, trying to piece things together, when the waitress brought the water. I thanked her quietly, barely noticing as she shuffled away. My mind kept replaying the last few days, the chat room, the hand at the window, the figure on my bed, and then the voice, that horrible breathy whisper. "We see you now." I couldn't shake it. But as I sat there, staring into my water, a new thought crept into my mind. If they saw me, then who else could they see? What if it wasn't just me? What if they were watching others too? Maybe the people in the chat room weren't crazy after all. Maybe they weren't imagining the lights, the footsteps, the lost time. Maybe they had been taken, just like they said. I opened my phone again, pulling up the browser and searching for the chat room. I didn't even know if I could find it again. I wasn't sure I wanted to, but I needed answers, something to explain what was happening. After several failed searches, I finally found a link buried deep in an obscure forum. The title was simple: Project Skywatchers, Still Watching. I hesitated for a long time before clicking it, but curiosity, or desperation, got the better of me. The page loaded slowly, and my heart sank when I saw the familiar black background and scrolling white text. It was the same chat room, but this time, the messages were different. The first one I saw sent chills down my spine. Has anyone seen it yet? The thing with the eyes. Someone responded almost instantly. They come after you start reading. It's too late. Another message popped up. It was in my room last night. I think they're here now. More and more messages flooded the screen, each one worse than the last. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I feel it standing over me. Has anyone else noticed the marks? They're on my arm. I don't remember getting them. Don't look outside. Whatever you do, don't look. My skin crawled as I read, but what scared me the most was how familiar all of this sounded. These people, they were describing exactly what I had experienced. The lights, the strange noises, the feeling that something was watching you, the pale figures, the dark eyes, the things that followed you home. I wanted to close the browser, to turn off my phone and pretend like none of this was happening. But then a new message appeared, and I froze. "We see you." It was directed at me. My username wasn't listed, but somehow I knew the message was meant for me. I felt a chill run down my spine, like something cold and sharp had brushed against the back of my neck. Before I could react, another message appeared. "Check your phone." My heart raced. I looked down, dreading what I might find, and sure enough, there was a new notification. It wasn't a text, or a call, or anything I'd ever seen before. Just a black screen with a single word, glowing faintly. Outside. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to, but my body moved on its own, my head slowly turning toward the diner's front windows. At first, everything seemed normal. The empty parking lot, the street beyond, still and quiet in the early morning hours. But then, at the edge of the lot, standing just outside the pool of light cast by the flickering neon sign, I saw them. Figures, pale, motionless. Their eyes, those impossibly dark eyes, were locked onto me. I felt the world spin around me. I blinked, hoping they'd disappear, that they were just a trick of the light. But when I looked again, they hadn't moved. They were still there, just standing at the edge of the darkness, waiting. The waitress passed by, completely oblivious to the terror that had latched onto me. I wanted to scream, to tell her to look, to see what I was seeing, but I knew it wouldn't matter. She wouldn't see them. They weren't here for her. They were here for me. I grabbed my phone, shoved it into my pocket, and stood up so quickly I nearly knocked the table over. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Run again? Call someone? I didn't even know if there was anywhere left to go. But as I started to move toward the door, my phone buzzed one last time. I pulled it out, not wanting to look, but knowing I had to. The message was short, just 2 words. It's time. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me as the lights in the diner flickered. My breath caught in my throat, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I turned toward the windows one last time. The figures were gone, but I knew they were still there, waiting. And sooner or later, they get what they came for, because once they've seen you, they never stop watching.
The dark web led me to a government facility where aliens are kept. The creatures escaped, and now they're coming for us. You know how they say curiosity killed the cat? I'm not a cat, obviously, but right now, I wish I had taken that saying more seriously. I've always been one of those guys who digs into weird internet stuff, like not the normal stuff you find on YouTube or Reddit. I'm talking about the kind of places you shouldn't even know exist. I've dabbled in the deep web before. Nothing major, just browsing. It's kind of thrilling, you know? You're always a click away from some dark, hidden secret that people aren't supposed to see. I've never done anything illegal or bought anything shady. I was just looking. But this time, I dug way too deep. So, a few weeks ago, I was bored, scrolling through some old forums, and stumbled upon this thread about the deep web. It was full of stories. Creepy, weird, probably fake stories about stuff people had seen. But one post stood out. It was from a guy named Lazarus. No picture, no fancy signature, just a black and white avatar of a face with no eyes. This guy was talking about a link he had come across on the deep web that led to something big. He kept hinting at it, like it wasn't some drug ring or hitman service. He was talking about something beyond government secrets, something out of this world, literally. He made it sound like there was a hidden site that led to proof of extraterrestrial life. I know, it sounds like some basement-dwelling conspiracy nut, but he wrote it so casually, like it was just another day on the internet for him. At the bottom of his post, he left a link, but not like a normal one. You know how people sometimes put puzzles on the deep web? You have to solve clues or follow a breadcrumb trail. It was like that. He didn't post the exact link, just a series of random numbers and letters. It looked like gibberish at first, but then I realized it was a cipher, and part of me, that part that loves a challenge, couldn't let it go. I cracked the cipher in a few hours. It led me to this obscure, password-protected site. The background was just a solid black screen, and in the middle of the page, there was one sentence. The truth is hidden in plain sight. Below it, a password box. I had no idea what the password was supposed to be, but I'm stubborn, so I spent the next few hours trying everything I could think of. And then, somehow, I got in. Honestly, I can't even tell you what I typed. It was a random guess, something stupid like Project X or something. The page loaded, and I was in. Now, I wish I hadn't been. It It was a government website. Like, legit government. You could tell by the layout. Basic, no frills, and definitely not meant for civilians. There were folders labeled Project Bluebird, Mogul, and then one that caught my eye. EBE 9. I didn't know what EBE meant at the time, but I later found out it stands for Extraterrestrial Biological Entity. You know, aliens. Yeah, that's when things started to feel off. I clicked on the folder. Inside were subfolders, each labeled by dates, going back to the 40s and up to 2023. Each one had files and pictures attached. I clicked on the most recent one, thinking I'd find some old declassified junk, maybe UFO sightings or something. What I found was much worse. There were photos. Grainy, low-quality, black and white photos. They were of these creatures, small, pale-skinned, large-headed beings lying on operating tables. Some looked like autopsies. Others, though, they were alive. Their eyes were huge, dark, and lifeless, staring straight at the camera. My heart was pounding in my chest at this point. I should have stopped there, but I couldn't. I scrolled through more photos, more files, medical reports, videos, even documents in government speak talking about containment facilities and protocols for leakage. It took me a minute to realize what they meant by leakage. Some of these files weren't just about containment. They were about breaches, creatures escaping, people disappearing. There was a file from as recent as 3 weeks ago about a containment breach at a facility somewhere in Nevada. At this point, I was freaking out. I mean, this was the kind of thing that gets people killed, right? Like, no way this was meant for anyone outside the government. But before I could even close the browser, something weird happened. The screen went black, like the whole website just shut down, and then a chat box popped up. User Lazarus joined the chat. "Hey, you shouldn't be here." That was all it said. I was frozen. I stared at the screen, my hands hovering over the keyboard. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. Another message popped up. "Seriously, leave. Now." Before I could respond, my entire screen went black, like my computer shut off. Gone. I tried turning it back on, but nothing. Dead. I unplugged it, plugged it back in. Still nothing. I'm not a paranoid person by nature, but I swear I felt like someone was watching me in that moment. I ended up taking my laptop apart that night. Paranoia, maybe. But I wasn't about to leave it in one piece. After that, for the next few days, I kept telling myself it was nothing. Just a prank, or some elaborate ARG that went too far. But then I started noticing weird stuff. Like, there was a black SUV parked outside my apartment for 2 days. Always the same one. I told myself I was being crazy, that maybe it was just a coincidence, but then my phone started acting up. Calls would drop, or sometimes I'd hear static on the other end, like someone was listening in. Even my internet would go out at random times, especially when I was online late at night. It's been almost 2 weeks since I visited that site. I'm writing this now because something happened last night that I can't ignore. Something that makes me think Lazarus, or whoever was behind that site, wasn't just messing around. Something that makes me think those creatures, they aren't just contained anymore. I was sitting in my living room late last night, just zoning out to a podcast, trying to forget about everything that had been happening. It was around 2 a.m., too late to be up, but sleep hadn't been coming easily for a while. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those images again, those cold, lifeless eyes of those creatures staring right through me. I was about to doze off when I heard it. A soft thud, like something hitting the wall outside my apartment.
It wasn't loud, but in the dead silence of the night, it was enough to jolt me awake. At first, I thought it was nothing. Maybe a stray cat or something. My apartment isn't in the greatest area, so random noises aren't uncommon. But then it came again. Thud. This time, it was louder, like something was pressing against the wall just behind my couch. My heart started racing. I muted the podcast and sat there, listening, straining to hear over the sound of my own heartbeat. There it was again, closer this time. It didn't sound like footsteps though. It was slower, more deliberate, like someone or something was dragging itself along the outside of my apartment. I slowly got up and crept over to the window. My blinds were down, but there was a tiny gap between the slats, just big enough to peek through without drawing too much attention. What I saw sent a chill down my spine. That same black SUV, the one that had been parked outside for days, was sitting across the street. But this time, it wasn't empty. There were two figures inside, both just sitting there, staring straight at my apartment. They weren't moving, just sitting like statues in the front seats. The headlights were off, but the glow from a nearby street lamp illuminated the inside enough for me to see their silhouettes. I felt like I was in some kind of bad dream. Why were they watching me? Had I really seen something I wasn't supposed to? My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it, but deep down, I knew this was connected to that website. Lazarus had warned me, but I didn't listen. And now, it felt like I had eyes on me everywhere I went. But that wasn't the worst part. As I stood there, frozen by the window, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. Movement, just beyond the reach of the streetlight. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but then it moved again, just enough for me to make out the shape of it. My stomach dropped. It wasn't human. It was standing at the edge of the street, just beyond the SUV. It was small, maybe 4 or 5 feet tall, hunched over like it was struggling to stay upright. The skin, it was pale, almost translucent, and its head was too large for its body. I couldn't see its face clearly, but I knew what it was. One of them. I backed away from the window, trying not to make a sound, but the floor creaked beneath my feet. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought they'd hear it through the walls. I scrambled toward the door, double-checking the locks, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the bolt. And then, the thud came again, this time from the window itself. I swear I almost screamed. I rushed back to the window, but kept low, just out of sight. Slowly, I peeked through the blinds again, but the street was empty. The SUV was gone. No figures, no creatures, just nothing. I was starting to think I was losing it, that maybe my mind was playing tricks on me after everything. I mean, who wouldn't go a little crazy after seeing what I had seen, right? But then my phone vibrated on the coffee table, breaking the silence. A new message. I didn't recognize the number. My hands were still shaking as I picked up the phone, but I opened the message. It was a picture of me, standing by the window, exactly where I had just been a minute ago. There was no caption, no explanation, just that image, taken from outside, showing me staring out into the night, like some idiot waiting for something to happen. I dropped the phone and backed away, my pulse pounding in my ears. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but who the hell was I supposed to call? The cops? They'd think I was insane. Hey, officer, I think some alien I found on the dark web is stalking me. Oh, and I'm being followed by government agents too. Yeah, that would go over well. But the worst part, I wasn't sure if it was the government watching me anymore, or if it was something else, something far worse. After the photo, I couldn't sleep. I just sat there, every light in my apartment on, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. No more thuds, no more strange figures outside my window. It was quiet. Too quiet. I spent the next few hours glued to my phone, scrolling through forums, desperately looking for answers. I didn't dare go back to that site. Hell, I wasn't even sure I could if I wanted to. My laptop was still dead, and even if it wasn't, I wasn't about to risk diving back into that mess. But then, just as the sun started to rise, I found something. It was a thread on some obscure conspiracy forum. Most of the posts were the usual nonsense, but one reply caught my attention. It was short, just a few lines, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. Lazarus isn't a person, it's a project, and if you've seen it, you're already part of it. That's when I heard the knock at the door. The knock was so soft at first that I thought I imagined it, but then it came again, louder this time, more deliberate. I froze, my body stiffening in place, as if moving even an inch would somehow bring whatever was on the other side closer. It was just after dawn, the pale light creeping through the cracks of my blinds, casting long shadows on the floor. My phone buzzed in my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to look at it. All I could focus on was the door, the one thing standing between me and whoever, or whatever, was out there. I stood there, waiting for a third knock, but it never came. The silence that followed was even worse, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. I listened hard, trying to pick up any noise from outside, footsteps, breathing, anything, but there was nothing. It was like the world had stopped, holding its breath, waiting for me to make the next move. Against my better judgment, I moved closer to the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. My heart was pounding so loudly, I half expected whoever was on the other side to hear it. I kept thinking about the photo from last night, the one of me standing at the window. They'd been watching me then, so what was stopping them now? I reached the door and leaned in, pressing my ear against the wood, trying to hear something, anything. At first, there was only the dead air, but then something shifted. It wasn't footsteps or the rustle of clothing. It was this soft, rhythmic hum. It was faint, almost like a vibration, and it seemed to be coming from all around me. It felt wrong, like it wasn't just a sound, but something alive, moving through the air. I stepped back from the door, my skin crawling, trying to shake the feeling. I wasn't going to open it. No way, not after everything that had been happening. But then my phone buzzed again. The screen lit up, showing yet another text from the same unknown number. This time, it wasn't a picture. It was a single line of text. Open the door, or we'll open it for you. My blood ran cold. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the message, my brain screaming at me to run, to hide, to do anything but open that door. I had no idea who or what was out there, but I knew that if they were giving me a choice, it wouldn't stay a choice for long. I didn't know what to do, but I had to move. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. Useless, I know, but it was the only thing that made me feel remotely safe. I slowly approached the door again, every step sending a shiver down my spine. With my free hand, I reached for the peephole, my breath shallow as I pressed my eye against it. There was no one there, at least no one human. The SUV was gone. The street outside was deserted, as if it had never been there at all. But standing right in front of my door, just inches away, was it? One of those things from the photos. It was hunched over, its large, dark eyes staring directly at the peephole, almost like it could see me through it. Its skin was waxy, pale, almost translucent, and its thin lips were curled into this grotesque, unnatural smile. But what terrified me the most was the way it was just standing there, completely still, not moving, not even blinking, like it was waiting. I stumbled back, my heart racing, the knife slipping from my hand and clattering onto the floor. Panic gripped me as I realized I was trapped. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide.
There was no way out. The hum grew louder, filling the air around me, and then the doorknob started to turn. Slowly, like someone was testing it, waiting for me to make a move. I bolted across the room, heading for the bathroom. I knew it was a stupid plan, but it was the only room with a lock. I slammed the door behind me and threw the bolt, backing into the far corner of the small, cramped space. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan, any plan. My phone was still in my pocket, but I knew calling the police would be useless. What was I going to tell them? That an alien was standing outside my door? That I was being stalked by the government? Yeah, that'd go over well. And then the doorknob stopped turning. I held my breath, listening. For a moment, it was dead quiet again. No hum, no movement, just silence. I thought maybe, just maybe, they had left. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was losing it. And then, from the other side of the bathroom door, I heard it. A voice. But not just any voice. It was my voice. "Let me in. You're safe. We can explain everything." I froze. The voice was calm, eerily calm, like someone trying to coax a scared animal out of hiding. But it wasn't right. There was something off about it. Like it was too flat, too mechanical. It didn't sound like me. It sounded like an echo of my voice. Like someone, or something, was trying to sound like me. My hands were trembling as I pressed my back against the bathroom wall, my mind spinning. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat had gone dry, and I was too terrified to speak, too terrified to move. The voice came again, more insistent this time. "Open the door. It's okay. We won't hurt you." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it out, trying to convince myself that this wasn't happening, that this was all some sick nightmare. Then, suddenly, the voice stopped. The silence returned, but this time it felt suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I don't know how long I sat there, my knees pulled to my chest, every muscle in my body tense, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Time seemed to stretch on forever, the weight of it crushing me from all sides. But then, in the silence, I heard a faint scratching at the bathroom door. Soft, deliberate, like nails scraping against the wood. And then, the door began to bend. The door, it was bending. Not like a door should bend, though. It was warping, the wood creaking and groaning as if it were being pulled from all directions at once. The edges of the frame started to twist, and thin cracks formed, running like spider webs across the surface. My breath hitched, and my back pressed harder against the cold tile wall, as if somehow pushing myself into it would make me invisible. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at that door, watching it bend and contort, but I remember feeling like time had completely lost meaning. The quiet scratching continued, slow and rhythmic, almost like it was trying to lull me into some false sense of calm. But I couldn't calm down. My mind was racing. This wasn't normal. Nothing about this was normal. I didn't dare blink. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. The door, still twisted and warped, held its new shape, but the noise, everything, went completely silent again. The kind of silence that makes you wonder if you've gone deaf. I strained my ears, waiting for something to happen, every second stretching into an eternity. Then, a faint voice, the same voice that had mimicked mine, whispered through the cracks of the door, "We can see you." My blood turned to ice. I hadn't spoken a word, hadn't moved, but they knew. They knew I was there, hiding, terrified, and they were playing with me. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to fight back, but I was paralyzed by fear, stuck in this waking nightmare. Before I could even process that, the door stopped bending and snapped back into place with a loud crack, like it had never been touched at all. The suddenness of it made me flinch, and I scrambled to my feet, breathing hard, gripping the bathroom sink for support. I was shaking, drenched in sweat, but I forced myself to approach the door. My whole body protested, screaming at me to stay put, but I had to know. I pressed my ear to the door again. There was nothing. No breathing, no footsteps, nothing that sounded remotely human or alien. Just stillness. I grabbed the knife I had left on the counter, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white, and slowly turned the lock. As I pulled the door open, my heart pounded in my chest like it was trying to break free. The hallway was empty. I stepped out cautiously, my eyes darting around the apartment, scanning every corner, every shadow. The living room was exactly as I had left it. The windows were closed. The door to my apartment was locked, deadbolt still in place. No sign that anything had been inside or outside. It was like I had imagined the whole thing, but I knew I hadn't. I could still feel it, the presence, the weight of whatever had been here. I could feel it lingering in the air like a residue. I quickly checked my phone, but there were no new messages, no pictures, no creepy texts, just the same message from earlier, hanging in my inbox like a threat I couldn't ignore. "Open the door, or we'll open it for you." I didn't have much time to think about it though, because that's when I noticed something strange, something I hadn't seen before. There was a smell in the air, faint but sharp, metallic, like blood. I followed it. It led me to the window, the one I'd looked out of earlier when I'd seen the SUV and the thing standing in the street. I pulled the blinds back slightly, just enough to peek outside, and that's when I saw it. There, lying in the middle of the street, was something, or someone. I couldn't make it out at first because of how dark it still was, but as the early morning light crept over the horizon, the shape became clearer. It was a person, a man, lying face down on the pavement, motionless. My stomach turned. For a brief moment, I thought maybe I should call someone, an ambulance, the cops, anyone. But something in me hesitated. Something about the way he was lying there, perfectly still, gave me a bad feeling. Like this wasn't just an accident or some random passerby. I grabbed my phone, using the camera to zoom in from the safety of my window. What I saw made my heart stop. It wasn't just any man, it was me. I dropped the phone in shock, the screen flicking off as it hit the floor with a dull thud. I backed away from the window, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. But I couldn't. There, lying on the ground, was a perfect replica of me. Same clothes, same face, everything. And it was dead. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be real. I was me, alive, standing in my apartment. But then, who the hell was that in the street? Panic surged through me as I struggled to breathe. My head was spinning, reality warping around me like a bad dream. Nothing made sense anymore. Was this what Lazarus meant by being part of it? Was this part of the project, the experiment, whatever the hell this was?
I didn't have time to think. The hum started again. This time, it was louder, vibrating the air around me, making my skin prickle like static. I spun around, looking for the source, and that's when I noticed it. The crack in the bathroom door. The one I thought had vanished. It was back, slowly spreading like an open wound, seeping this faint, almost invisible mist into the air. Something was coming through. The hum grew louder, the mist thickening, swirling through the crack like it was being pulled from another dimension. I grabbed the knife tighter, but I knew, deep down, that it wouldn't do any good. Whatever was on the other side wasn't human. Hell, I wasn't even sure if it was bound by the same rules of reality. My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look at it, but I couldn't help myself. The screen lit up with a single word, from the same unknown number. Run. Before I could process the message, the door exploded open, and the mist poured into the apartment, thick and suffocating, swirling in chaotic patterns. I stumbled back, choking on the thick metallic taste of it, my vision blurring as the hum intensified. And then, through the mist, I saw them, those same dark, lifeless eyes from the photos, staring at me from the doorway. The creatures. They had found me. I didn't think. I ran. I ran harder and faster than I ever had in my life, out of the apartment, down the stairs, into the street. The mist followed, creeping like a living thing, snaking after me, hunting me. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the city, and even then, I could feel it behind me. And now, even as I sit here, writing this from a cheap motel hours away, I know it's not over. It's never over. They're still coming for me. And next time, I don't think I'll be able to outrun them. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those creatures, those hollow eyes, the twisted grin, the mist. It was like they were burned into my mind, etched there, always waiting. I stayed holed up in that dingy motel room, the flickering light above me, casting weird shadows on the walls. I couldn't tell if it was just the room, or if I was seeing things, but I could swear the shadows were moving, like they had a life of their own. My phone was dead now. Completely. No amount of charging or restarting could bring it back to life. And honestly, part of me was relieved. I was done with the messages, with the ominous texts telling me to run. What was the point? Wherever I went, whatever I did, they were going to find me. It was only a matter of time. Still, sitting there, staring at the cracks in the wall, I realized I couldn't just wait for them to catch up with me. I had to do something. I had to figure out why this was happening, why they had singled me out. What had I done besides stumble onto a part of the web I was never meant to see? Then it hit me. Lazarus, the message I'd found on that forum, the one that said it wasn't a person, but a project. If I was going to survive, I needed answers, and they had to be connected to whatever that project was. I wasn't a hacker, and I wasn't about to go back to the deep web after what had happened. But I had one last shot. There was a guy I knew, more of an acquaintance, really. He was one of those conspiracy theorists who'd been deep in the rabbit hole for years. Aliens, secret government projects, you name it. He believed in it. Normally I'd laugh off his theories, but now I needed him. I grabbed my jacket, packed what little I had, and left the motel. The air outside felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on me. Even though the morning sun was up, the sky had this weird, hazy quality to it, almost like the mist from my apartment had followed me here. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that they were close. But I kept walking, not looking back until I reached the bus station. 2 hours later, I was standing in front of his house. It was exactly what you'd expect from a guy like him. Run down, overgrown yard, thick metal bars on the windows. I knocked, half expecting no answer. But then, the door creaked open, just a crack, and a pair of paranoid eyes stared back at me. "Who sent you?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, like he'd been smoking too many cigarettes. "No one," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's me, Jake. I need your help." The door opened wider, and he stepped back, letting me in. His place was a mess. Papers, boxes, and weird equipment everywhere. Walls covered in old newspaper clippings and maps with red string connecting random points. It looked like a scene straight out of a movie. But I didn't care. I was desperate. "I saw them," I blurted out as soon as the door shut behind me. He froze, staring at me like he didn't believe it. "What did you see?" "Aliens," I said, my voice shaking. "Or something close enough." I told him everything. The website, the photos, the SUV, the creatures, the mist. He listened, never interrupting, but his eyes grew wider with each detail I gave. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, like he was processing it all. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "You weren't supposed to see that." "I know," I replied, frustrated. "But what the hell is Lazarus? What are these things?" He hesitated, like he wasn't sure if he should tell me, but then he sighed and rubbed his face, his paranoia slipping just enough for him to talk. "Lazarus isn't just one project," he began. "It's a series of experiments, black ops stuff. They've been running it for decades, since Roswell at least. The government's been working with extraterrestrial technology, trying to reverse engineer it. And these things, they aren't just aliens, they're byproducts." "Byproducts?" I asked, my skin crawling. He nodded. "Hybrid creatures, created from whatever they could find. Some of them didn't survive, but the ones that did, well, they weren't exactly stable. They've been kept locked up in government facilities for years, but sometimes things slip. Breaches, people disappear." I felt my stomach drop. "And the mist?" "That's them," he said. "It's part of their biology. They don't just exist in our reality. They move between dimensions, like shadows slipping through cracks in the world. The mist is how they breach, how they find you." I sat down, my legs giving out from under me. This wasn't just some government cover-up. I'd been targeted by something beyond comprehension, something I could never escape. "What do they want from me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer right away. He just stared at me, like he knew something I didn't, something worse than I had imagined. "They don't want anything from you," he said finally. "They are you." My heart stopped. "What?" "Think about it," he continued, his voice low. "The photos, the doppelganger in the street, the voices mimicking yours. They've already started. They're replacing you. Slowly, piece by piece. Every time they get closer, every time you hear them, they take a little more of you, until there's nothing left." I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to deny it, trying to find some logical explanation. But deep down, I knew it was true. Every time they came, every time I heard the hum, they were stealing pieces of me, my voice, my image, my soul. "And when they're done," I asked, dreading the answer. He looked at me with pity. "You'll disappear, and no one will remember you were ever here." I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't just about survival. It was about existence. I had become part of something bigger, something dark and twisted, and there was no way out. "I can help you hide," he said, standing up, moving toward a stack of papers. "It won't stop them, but it might buy you some time. Enough to—" The sound cut him off. A low, vibrating hum. The mist was creeping under the door. His eyes widened, and before he could say anything, the lights in the house flickered, then went out. The hum grew louder, and the mist thickened, swirling like smoke. And then I saw them. Figures, just barely visible in the haze, their eyes dark and unblinking, staring through the fog. "They've already found us," I whispered, backing up. He grabbed my arm. "You need to run. Now." But it was too late. The mist enveloped the room, cold and suffocating, and the last thing I saw before everything went dark were those eyes, black, endless eyes, pulling me into their depths. I don't know how long I've been here, in this space between spaces, but I know one thing. I'm not alone. They're here with me, and soon they'll be with you too. When you hear the hum, run.